What's going on, everybody? Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and whatever time it is. Welcome back to yet another video with you, man. A Measureholic, and ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another faction overview for the Divide Et Impera overhaul mod for Total War Rome 2. Today, everybody, we are checking out the Roxolani, and this is not just a typical Roxolani faction overview. No, this is the first time that we are covering one of the 3 nomadic factions that is being overhauled in the 1.3.2 patch for Divide Et Impera. So the Roxolani are the first to be overhauled. They are currently the only faction at the time of this recording that's available that has been overhauled in the beta. However, the Royal Scythians right here and the Saka Rauka will also be getting overhauled. So we'll be covering those in the coming weeks as they get updated into the beta patch. However, for today, we are checking out the Roxolani. Before we do get into it though, I will just iterate to you all that this is still being taken place in the Divide Et Impera beta for the 1.3.2 patch. That's right, this is a beta. It is a public beta that is accessible to everyone watching. I will be leaving a link in the description, as I have been in my other DI 1.3.2 patch videos that I've been doing. Make sure you go ahead and check out the patch if you want to play it. Otherwise, you could just wait until the patch gets integrated into the main DEI mod. But just want to reiterate, this is a beta. There may be some bugs and there may be some changes that happen over time. I will be sure to note any significant changes either in the comments down below, or I can go ahead and do a whole new faction overview if needed for the Roxolani. I don't see it as being likely, but I'm more than happy to do it if needed. So please do keep an eye out for any pinned comments by me, especially if you're watching this far off in the future, as I will try to keep up-to-date information for you all. But anyway, without any further ado, let's jump on in to the Roxolani faction overview for the 1.3.2 patch for DEI. Alright everybody, here we are with the Skudat cultural group. Skudat, I have no idea what that means, but anyway, this is the nomadic cultural group. Of course, you will need the nomadic cultures group DLC by Creative Assembly for Total War Rome 2, so please do make sure that you buy that and install it. It is not a limitation set forth by the DEI team, it's just something that's a part of Rome 2, and it is what it is. So just want to give a little heads up to that. But anyway, here we are with the Skudat cultural group. All of the 3 nomadic factions that you can play as, at least the Scythian Sarmatian style nomadic factions you play as, share the following buffs. They have the Born in the Saddle buff, which gives a minus 25% to upkeep to all cavalry units. Very, very nice. You then have a Sea of Grass buff, which increases morale on plains and grasslands. Very, very nice as well, because you're surrounded by plains and grasslands, and the majority of the fighting you do will be in there. However, just for the Roxolani, they get the Dread buff, Dread Vanguard buff, which increases the charge for Lancer units. Lancians, however you want to pronounce it. Very nice, because Lancers will be very vital for you early on in the campaign, and pretty much throughout the whole thing, really, but especially early on. We then have the Mustering Horde buff, which increases recruitment slots at the capital for you. Note that it is only in the capital, so you might want to really tailor your core province to being a bit of a military recruitment one, where you can get some more ranks and buffs added to your units upon recruitment. You then have the Nomadic Encroachers debuff, which is a major diplomatic penalty with all nomadic factions. So that hints heavily at basically your entire campaign, which is you're the antagonist to the other nomadic factions in the area to a degree. So you do not get along with the majority of the nomadic factions. You'll pretty much be fighting all of them. But anyway, that's it for your buffs and debuffs. Now let's get into the part 1 section of this video. We'll check out the grand campaign for the Roxolani. Alright everybody, here we are at the campaign section of this faction overview for the Roxolani, and here we are with, yet again, we're going back to the one-hitter quitter time. I know the last time we did a campaign overview, which is a bit of a mixture of faction overview and campaign overview, We were checking out the Moriani, Solani, and Pontus, and none of them were one-hitter quitters, but now the Roxolani are yet again a one-hitter quitter. Oh no, we're back to that. This is your one city that you have, city of Ra. R-H-A. I have no idea how you pronounce that. I'm not sure if that's going in Latin or the native Sarmatian tongue. But anyway, that's what that is. That's what it says on the map, and I'm just going to read it in English because that's what we do here. You have one single city in the province of Scythia. You also have one single army led by your High King. He has his general's bodyguard of Sarmatian Guard. And then you have 2 javelin skirmisher units on horseback, and then you have a single Sarmatian lancer unit. That's that. That's all you have. You have no agents at the beginning of the game. You have no special resources besides the leather you start off with. Leather isn't a terrible one to have, but it's not all that amazing either. I mean, it is what it is. It can be helpful, and I'm sure if you're one of the economic players out there who knows how to min-max, you know the bonuses of resources and whatnot, but for the standard DEI player, leather isn't really going to affect your campaign. Unfortunately, the rest of Scythia, let's go ahead and check out the province, is under other nomadic faction control, and they pretty much don't like you. So you have the Thessaikete over here, who have the capital of Scythia, the city of Takes. They will declare war on you turn 1 every single campaign you ever do. If you somehow get through a single turn without them declaring war on you instantly, that's crazy to me. Unless you're playing on like very easy, or maybe easy even. But yeah, these campaign overviews are of course tailored towards normal difficulty settings. These guys hate you and they will come for you very quickly. We then have the Syracuse faction, which holds the city of Syracana, down here to your southwest. Pretty minor settlement overall, nothing too crazy about it, no resources. Then you have Samander, same sort of deal here. The main interest, or thing that is interesting about these cities, is that they are basically gateways to other locations. With Samander being the gateway to the south, to where you go through, get into the Caucasus region, and then into Armenia proper, and then wherever the hell you want to go, you can go into the east, towards Syria, to Anatolia, whatever. But it all kind of starts with this being the gateway. I mean, it literally is a gateway. You have a beautiful little bridge right there to stop enemies from invading, another one over here as well, so it certainly acts as a barrier town for you to keep the major factions at bay, especially factions like the Kartli and the Armenians. Syracana, very similar, because to the west of that you have the Arch-Bosphorus faction, the Hellenic faction over here. We then also have the Royal Scythians up here as well. So you have a lot of enemies that will be potentially coming from the west. Well, not a lot of enemies, but you have some pretty key enemies at least coming from the west, and they will be coming through the area of Syracana, and it's pretty rare for the AI to march through territory that you control and not go through your city, and instead try to like take your capital. So it's generally unlikely that, say, the Royal Scythians are just going to march along here and then go straight for your capital. If you own the city of Syracana, they're probably going to be coming down here 90% of the time. That's what I find in my testing. That's what I find in other people's feedback. But anyway, that's all that. Just a little bit extra info for your geography of the region. What else do we have? Let's go diplomacy. You don't have a lot going on. As you can see, all of your neighbors are considered same blood because they're all nomads and mixtures of Scythians and Sarmatians alike. The Aorsoi down here to the south are the friendliest with you. They have a trade agreement with you, but that's it. They don't have non-aggression or anything like that.
Good and noble
if we go here and check it out, you can get non-aggression instantly. However, after turn 1, diplomacy kind of goes down with a lot of these factions. It's just a natural sort of thing that occurs. The Aorsoi, however you want to pronounce it, are no different. So if you do want to be friends with them, hurry up and get it done early, basically is what I'm saying. But anyway, the rest of your neighbors don't really like you. You don't have any other diplomacy going on. You can try to get some, but it's going to be difficult early on. It's going to be more of a bit of a mid-game thing once you take over the region of the Bosphorus over here. Then you'll get yourself trade throughout all the Black Sea, out here through the Aegean, and then into the Mediterranean. So that's going to be really key, is taking Bosphorus to be a bit of a commercial hub for you. Hopefully sooner rather than later, but I mean, it's up to you how you want to play. And that is also where you'll have more resources, such as, I believe, gold or some sort of mineral resource up here. But anyway, you have the port capital city of the Bosphorian region right there. Taking that city is going to be key, and it might even serve as a good capital for you later on. So like I said, no over diplomacy. What else do we have? Let's talk about your government very quickly and family tree. So your family tree is rather limited. You have your king, starts off at 32 years old, though, so a little bit older. Nikak Usu, I'm sure I'm getting that pronunciation spot on. He's a little bit older, so if you want to get some heirs just directly from him, hurry up and get him married quickly. I mean, if you're playing on 12 turns per year, then it's not as vital, but I would still hurry up. Otherwise, once he dies, the only other person you have in your family is your niece, Ahasunu. She's 21 years old, and the Roxolani are actually one of the few factions in Divide Et Impera that actually allows females to command armies and to rule. For example, if you look right here, I can go ahead and declare an heir, and I can select Ahasunu to be our heir instantly on turn 1. So if we die, she's going to be the top dog. I know there's been a massive amount of controversy regarding female units in Rome 2 whatever. I'm not even going to join that debate, but I will say that the Divide Et Impera team makes decisions based on historical accuracy and authenticity. That's all I'll say on that. If you have issues with that, feel free to take it up with them, but I think it's fantastic. And it adds in a nice little bit of flavor to the game, because we do have men everywhere doing everything, so it just adds in even a little bit of extra flavor to the area. In addition to your southeast, the Thesagate, your most mortal enemy, is also ruled by a woman instantly. She declares war on you. She doesn't like you. The queen of the Thesagate is grumpy. Even look at her face. She looked mad, man. I don't know what we did, but she hates us. Oh, well, there's a bunch of things we did. Never mind. No wonder she hates us. We have military actions against them, trespassing. We're very bad to them. At least we have been in the past, so fair enough. But anyway, it's just a really cool little note that I thought I'd make you all aware of. You also have some female soldiers in some of your certain units as well, where it makes sense historically. What else do we have? We have your population. Population in the city of Ra is not looking fantastic. You start off with only 15,000 people. It is relatively well spread out, although your elite class is tiny at just 500, and it's going up pretty slowly initially at plus 15 per end turn. But despite it being at only 15,000, it's a little bit deceiving, because you are a nomadic faction. That means that you need cavalry. Now, cavalry in DEI, and in just Rome 2 in general, really, is going to be smaller in terms of the quantity of people that you need to make a unit. So Sarmatian Horse Archers, one of the most pinnacle type of unit that you're going to be needing to use, one of the most important units and most cost-effective units you'll be using. Sarmatian Horse Archer comes from the fat social class. Yes, that is the actual word that they're going with. And you instantly start off with 8,400 men available in your starting city, and you only need 120 to get a single unit. That's a lot of different horse archer units that you can recruit before you run out of that population tier. Same sort of thing goes for your tribal lancer unit here, which is very important to get. This requires 140 men though, so you do get a little bit extra men with that, 20 more. But comparing this to say like your tribal warriors, which is 200 men, instantly cutting into your very limited population there. for a unit that isn't necessarily worth it, at least in terms of cost effectiveness. I mean, it's up to you and how you play, but it's just something to consider. All of your other infantry are going to be around 200 men or so. Your skirmishers won't be. I'll be 175 at most, at least for those units. But what I'm saying is, don't freak out, don't panic. You do have a decent population to start with, and the rest of Scythia has population for you to take over. As soon as you take over all of these cities, which were floating around 20 to 25k for each city in terms of population, you can see here in the top right corner of the box, they're all going pretty fine. And then you do have some more nomadic cultural areas just outside of Scythia. Like, for example, you have some over here towards the Pani region, and then above the Archbosphorus faction in Royal Scythia over here, I believe, you will have some more cities with population at your disposal. So you're not going to be running out of nomads anytime soon. That's going to be more of a problem in the mid to late game once you begin expanding and your armies are going to need to be recruited on your border regions. But that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But essentially, population, while it is limited, it isn't necessarily a problem unless you're really just throwing away your armies. This is not a faction where you can just auto-resolve and hope for the best. So let's talk about your economy and then a few little final tips and overall sentiment. Your economy is basically going to need to be industry driven. You can try to do commerce if you really want, especially if you get some nice resources and a nice trade port in like the Bosphorus region, for example. But early on, you're going to need to be looking to make some investments in industry, especially once you unite the province of Scythia. You do have 4 cities, so you can use some temples and other buildings to try and boost your industry income. I mean, your core starting city straight away instantly gives you manufacturing bonuses to industry. So that gets increased as you go all the way up. So at tier 4 we get plus 8 wealth from manufacturing, which is industry, in all of your regions of this province. So Scythia needs to become an industry province pretty quickly. Agriculture isn't really going to be your strong suit. It can be if you really try, but something that's sort of transformed with the barbarian factions in DEI is that they thrive off industry. At least certain chunks of the barbarian factions do, and the Roxolani, I would say, belong to that category. Now, I'm sure there's certain ways to min-max to, get other forms of your economy to really flourish, but just as a sort of general guide or general overview for your economy, focus on industry, do what you can with that, and try to get trade by going through the Bosporan region down here. Down here. It looks very far away, but it won't take you that long to get down there, trust me. Trust me, bro. Anyway, final sentiment though on some sort of tips and whatnot. You can't just build a single army template and expect to conquer the map. That's the sort of thing you might be able to do with like Rome or Macedon, Egypt, Seleucids, those kinds of big factions with fantastic quality units that, historically were very much a strong contender for conquering the world. These nomadic factions, while they obviously are capable of the same sort of thing, looking at you, Mongolia and the Huns, but anyway, in reality of Total War Rome 2 and DEI in particular, it's going to be very difficult. And so you're going to need to tailor your armies to handle different conditions and different scenarios. So straight off the bat, I would recommend you turn this starting army you have into a nomadic army. Get it to be completely full of your horse archers that you can get access to. Get like half of those, half of the tribal lancers. That would be my suggestion. Go ahead and knock out the army of the Thesagate with that. Try to reduce your casualties as much as possible, and then draw the enemy army out. That should be your aim to get done within the first 10 turns, in my opinion. 15 turns at most. But like I said, if you have some bad luck, or you kind of struggle, or you might not necessarily know exactly what to do, then it might take you 20 or more turns just to take this city down here. It is not uncommon to hear something like that. So taking your core province is going to be quite challenging, but that's why I'm saying to be aggressive, because you need to cut out that time that it is going to take. It's a difficult province to start off with because of the space in it, because you have other nomadic factions that have the same units as you almost. Well, not the same, but same type of units at least. So you're going to be countered as you do attack them. So it's definitely quite a difficult starting position. Another thing that you need to consider before we end here is supply. Now we go over here to your, to your supply window. You can see you don't start off with a lot of supplies. Total supplies is 197 out of 420. Not really looking fantastic. And you don't have any potential for building up other buildings as well. So quite quickly what you're going to find is that your nomadic armies begin consuming the crap out of supplies, especially if you do all cavalry armies. Cavalry will take almost about twice as much supply as a infantry based army will. So I don't know the specific mathematics on it, but from my testing and whatnot, it's approximately about double what an infantry based army is going to be taking. So you will find within the first 20 turns or so, your armies are going to be taking big attrition if you don't take the right steps. One of the big steps to do is to try and have these cities that you take over build supply depots, or build like agricultural chains that increase your supplies, such as the sheep flock building chain is quite helpful, and that will stop your armies from immediately going out of supply. But as you get into war and you're attacked by enemies, that can also be used as a weapon against them, where their armies might get drained of supply. Your armies might as well, but hey, at least you can prepare for it and try to move your cities, having your armies to different regions where they're not going to be affected. So anyway, that is your campaign. I talked for a little bit longer than what I expected here, but it's also a very small starting position, and I wanted to try and get you guys a picture of the Roxolani. It's a really fun campaign from what I've tested and what I've seen, especially with this new faction overhaul. And the biggest way that you see the faction overhaul is in the units, as they have a completely new roster. So with that, let's go ahead and check out the part 2 section of this video, where we see the military overview of the Roxolani. Alright everyone, here we are at the part 2 section of this video, where we check out the military of the Roxolani. As you can hear, the nomadic riders in the background are fired up and ready to go into battle. And here we are with one of our general units. I am going to keep the unit cards up here for a short time, just so you can check them out yourself if you like. If you would like them up for the entire duration of the, what do you call it? Of this section of the video, please do let me know in the comments below, but I'll kind of interchange with it a little bit more than normal. But anyway, we're going to begin by checking out the general units that you get access to as a Roxolani. Although before we do that, let me just comment very quickly on our navy and our reforms that we have. So the reforms for the Roxolani are the same as the Royal Scythian. So if you go onto the DI website, you'll see it listed there. Also, if you check out the technology, the purple technology icon in the technology tree for the Roxolani, it does list the specific requirements there, but I'll list it here for you now. The reforms can be triggered in one of two ways: either 100 turns of owning a region of another Scythian or Sarmatian faction, or within 70 turns and 10 battles against other Scythian / Sarmatian factions. So you don't necessarily have to own the territory, although that's the easier but longer way of doing it. What you can do instead is fight 10 battles against a Scythian Sarmatian faction and then wait until turn 70 at the very least. Also, your navy is absolutely abysmal, probably one of the worst navies I've seen ever. Your one saving grace is that the majority of your ships have 950 HP, although one of your 3 ships has 800 HP. So you have a general, which is the axe unit, your typical melee ship, which is just a spear unit, and then you have an archer unit. Only one ship for each type of unit. So just to keep that in your head. That's what that is. Kind of rough, but such is the way. Anyway, let's talk about your general. You start off with a Salmation Guard unit. Excellent sort of heavy melee cavalry unit. This isn't a shock cav unit, which is a little bit different because you don't really have any dedicated melee cavalry. Your one unit that you do is your general unit, really. The other units we'll see are more so shock cavalry or a combination of skirmisher and either shock or melee cav. So very, very nice unit. Although one thing to note about your general, which I can't really understand why it's the case, and I'm not sure if it will stay. But your Salmation Guard unit has the stalk ability. If you look down here in the bottom left corner, you'll see me hover over it. This means that your general can be hidden in any kind of terrain. And he can move and stay hidden. So you could be out in the middle of like open fields like this, and your enemy isn't going to see you. At least not see your general until they get close. So that's what's going on with that. A little bit strange, but just wanted to point that out. I'm not sure if that's intended because it literally is the only unit in your roster with that ability. So we'll see if the DI team changes it. But anyway, besides that, you also have resistance to cold, which is very nice. You're disciplined for a lot of your units, although not every single one. The only other real ability of note is that that unit has a guerrilla deployment unit, trait. Besides that, all of your units have resistance to cold, so you're going to be less likely to be cold with that. And that's essentially the main thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of your traits and whatever. But yeah, I'm not going to go over the numbers of these statistics for every single unit. I'm just going to point out what's good, what's bad, and what's useful in what certain ways. So anyway, this is your general. Let's move on from the Sarmatian Guard, and we'll talk about this Royal Sarmatian Guard that you get. This is a very much shock cavalry dedicated bodyguard unit. Looks just absolutely incredible. I do love, I'm not sure if you call this ribbon or what do you call it? Straw? No, not straw. String wrapped around. I'm not sure what you would call that wrapped around the lance, but anyway, it looks fantastic. I really love it. We'll definitely get some Allen vibes in here, which is fitting for the Roxolani, as historically I believe they're a bit of an offshoot, or at the very least related to the Allens. At least it's believed. Very, very fantastic looking unit. Very tough, very heavy. Don't have a very big military roster, but I will try to get through this still rather quickly. Let's go to your infantry first, because your infantry is some of the biggest changes that the Roxolani deal with. So let's go here, get this, get rid of the mini-map. Over here you have Sarmatian Skirmish, is your only infantry unit that has a javelin. Or at least that is a dedicated javelin unit. Nothing worthy to note about them though. Don't even have armor piercing damage, so they don't use any axes, unfortunately. But moving on to the rest of your skirmishers, we got some tribal archers, the lowest tier sort of archer you get access to. Pretty basic, not very inspiring to use. I mean statistically wise, it's quite poor. This is where we're going to see a mixture though of female units getting thrown into the mix with the men, so that's really fun to see. I like that a lot myself, but each to his own. But that's basically your lowest tier archer. We then jump up to the Sarmatian archers over here. A little bit more typical of your tribe, rather than just being kind of random tribal archers. These are Sarmatian, so the stats are just slightly better across the board, but you may as well use them if you can. Then we jump up here though to the medium Sarmatian archers. Again, I'm keeping the let me actually just very quickly group up these units so you can better see them. Apologies, I should have already done that, but I'm trying to keep up this unit card here so you all can what do you call it? See the new unit cards, because there is a bunch of new unit cards and I've had some requests for it. Shout out to my man Swaraj for asking.
Archers!
But anyway, this right here are medium Sarmatian archers. This is like the bread and butter of your archers. And you do have a lot of archers, so you're definitely going to be wanting to use them in your campaign. You do not have any slingers at all, and you only have one javelin unit that isn't on horseback. So these bad boys, very useful. They have a good armor of 20 as well, and there is shields on their backs, which does help with their defense. And even if needed, they can do okay in a melee engagement. I wouldn't charge head on into anything, but they can certainly be useful. Awesome new looks going on here. Loving their little hats. No idea what you call it, but looking badass. Absolutely phenomenal looking unit. I really, really like it. And then we move up though to your elites, to your chosen archers. Now these are the bad boys of the Roxolani. Fantastic unit. Contender for being at least in the top 10 of archers in the game, perhaps top 5. With a range of 185. That is absolutely redonkulous, in a nice way.
We'll kill them all!
Just fantastic, really. Very heavy. Obviously has a massive shield on its back as well. Armor of 30, melee attack of 11, defensive 9. Sounds low, but this is an archer unit for frig's sake, so really, really nice. Again, though, we're lacking that armor piercing. Keep in mind, we have not seen a single unit that has good armor piercing, except your cataphracts, but even then, that's typical of a cataphract. We've just done melee armor piercing of 12. So keep that in mind. Hardly any armor piercing so far. But anyway, that's it for your infantry that are skirmishers. 4 archers. Oh gosh, what was that? 4 archers, and then a single javelin unit. Let's jump up to your swordsman that you get. You only get 3 units, unfortunately, but it's still a big increase from before, which was basically, I think it was 1 or none. So anyway, we get access to tribal warriors straight up. 200 men in the unit, which is a bit unfortunate, although they do have an ammunition of 3. So these bad boys got 3 javelins to throw into combat before they themselves get involved. Again, no armor piercing, although they do have a high melee attack of 11. So these guys are damage dealers for the most part. They're not going to take a lot of punishment themselves, but with those javelins and with that high melee attack, they can get some damage in.
Warriors!
We then come over here to the Sarmato Bossborn infantry. These guys are kind of like your Thurio style unit you have access to. In fact, it says Thurio Foroi in the title, in the Latin titles. Sarmatoi Thurio Foroi. Oh my goodness, I hope you all know that I don't do any actual Latin at all. That's why I always say just the English name, which is the Sarmato Bossborn Warriors. Fantastic unit. Very, very nice. Going to be the sort of cream and butter of your infantry in terms of swordsmen. We are still seeing that ammunition of 3, which is really, really high. Quite nice, quite powerful. Get a lot of damage in before they even get hurt themselves. And they got high melee attack and high defense, good armor of 10 as well. Fantastic unit.
Melee fighters ready!
Then we move on to your Sarmatian warriors. Look at these bad boys. Very, very nice. Loving those shields. Giving me some Viking vibes right here. Just because my ignorance in that. I love the round shields that the Vikings use. Just the artistic style and the large sort of radius of the shield is certainly reminiscent of the Viking factions. These guys really, really solid with an armor of 30, melee attack of 13. Fantastic melee attack to start, defense of 10. But again, melee armor piercing damage is only at 2. They do have a high weapon damage of 28, so when they do hit, they have the chance to do a lot of good high damage. But, I mean, if it was armor piercing, then it would at least be guaranteed. That's the main difference between those two forms of damage. So these guys will get some damage in, but it's going to take a little bit longer than an armor piercing unit. you're not really going to have a whole army full of these guys until the late game, but these guys will be the ones taking cities for you alongside AOR mercenary units that you will need in order to do well in this campaign. But anyway, that's it for your 3 swordsmen that you get access to. We'll then move on over here to your spearmen. We actually have quite a few spearmen to check out.
Stab spearmen!
We have Tribal Spearmen, which is your super basic low tier entry level spearman unit. No javelin at all for them and only 200 men.
We'll kill them all!
Sarmatian version of the same unit, which does have a javelin and slightly better stats almost across the board, except for a couple different areas like melee attack. What else was it that it didn't do as well? Oh yeah, armor piercing damage only 4 compared to 5 to the Tribal Spearmen. So Sarmatian Spearmen are better in my opinion, but just not all that much better.
You have our spears!
Sarmato Bosporan or Sarmatio Bosporan Spearmen. These guys are very, very nice. Getting into sort of like Furio Spear style guys, although we also see that with the upcoming units as well. But this unit, a little bit lower, but it's still fantastic. The epitome of, I would actually say, a mid-tier unit. Armor 20, attack of only 7, but defensive 17, which is monstrous for a mid-tier spear unit. So these guys will be very helpful for you in dealing with enemy spearmen, and they do have the repel cavalry ability.
Shields!
So here we can see them getting into the new repel cavalry tactic. Looking very, very nice. Very similar to the discipline formation and whatnot. Except, of course, this is spearmen. So, anyway. Fantastic unit. But it does only have 200 men and only 1 javelin. So, keep that in mind. But then from the Bosporan Sarmatian Spearmen, we then jump up to the Syracuse Spearmen. Immediately, you can tell a massive difference in the visuals. We're getting a lot of browns here. A lot of chainmail. A lot of very nice helmets, whereas over here it's not everyone has a helmet, they're just not well equipped or as well equipped. So to contrast that, we have 30 armor over here for the Syracuse Spearmen opposed to 20. Stats are high across the entire board. Most notably, in my opinion, will be the bonus versus cavalry, whereas the Sarmato Bosporan Spearmen only have 17. These bad boys go up to 21 for bonus versus elephants and cav. So that's really, really nice. They don't have a javelin to throw though, so that is going to hurt them a little bit, but I mean, look, these guys look fantastic. He's looking lethal. He looks mean. Big old meanie. Anyway, and it's just an excellent unit. Very nice. It says medium spear unit. I would argue it's a heavy spear unit, especially considering this is a barbarian faction. Borderline an elite unit. However, we do have an actual elite unit for you.
Stab spearmen!
Over here, we have the Sarmato Bosporan Heavy Spearmen. These guys are very heavy spearmen, considering a barbarian. Look at the armor for these guys. Like, nothing is getting through. If you've played Total War Attila, this might give you some of the Roman Comitatense spears sort of vibes, where you're seeing these long spears. It looks longer than normal too, and size does matter, ladies and gentlemen. I know, feels bad, but anyway. These spears are slightly longer than normal. Large oval shield to provide serious protection alongside an armor of 38. Their melee defense is 20 off the bat. Like, that's disgusting. It's very, very nice. These guys can survive against a lot of different enemy units for a very long time. They do have the disciplined formation ability as well. Just absolutely fantastic. Although, no javelin yet again. So a bit of a letdown for that side of things. But anyway, that is it for your spearmen. Having 5 spears is pretty substantial, considering that you didn't have hardly any infantry before for the Roxolani. So the spearmen will form the core of your army in the early game, but as you kind of expand to the mid to late game, that's where we're going to be seeing things like swordsmen start to take more precedent alongside AOR and merc units, at least for your infantry-based armies. However, what the main thing you'll be using is in your early game is cavalry. So let's get to your cav, which is all the backline over here. We'll do all of your skirmisher cav first, but I will just say this box right here that I'm highlighting, this is all of your skirmisher type cavalry. However, for this red box right here, this is your javelin cav.
Skirmishes!
So we got some mounted Sarmatian skirmishers, very very fast, but super low tier entry level sort of skirmisher unit. Nothing really too much to talk about with them. They do have Parthian shots, so they'll be shooting while firing, but I mean it's relatively typical for nomadic units.
The missile warriors!
Sarmatian riders. Now these guys are one of the units I was talking about earlier. That is a mixture of being a skirmisher and a melee cav unit. So these guys will do very well in a longer prolonged engagement. They even have an armor of 28, which is pretty substantial. Decent speed of 7, but yeah, melee attack of 11, defense of 10. These guys are going to do pretty well in a grind out fight, unless they're going against really elite units. But try to let them use their ammunition first, get them into melee, and they will do quite well for you. But that's your main sort of mid-tier melee cavalry that you'll need in your army, so definitely use these guys. 120 men, as is the case for all of your cavalry units, all of the cav units, sorry. Except one of them, which we'll talk about shortly. Anyway, let's jump on to the absolute epitome of what it is to be a nomadic faction, which is of course your horse archers.
Horse archers!
Over here we start off with Sarmatian horse archers, your absolute entry level unit. It's not very good stat for stat, but when you get a horde of these bad boys and you use them appropriately with a really high speed of 8, these guys can get a lot of damage done to the enemy. This is what your first army will almost be entirely made of. If you follow my advice at least, we can get a lot of horse archers and a lot of shock cavalry, which we'll see soon. But anyway, as you can see, no armor of any kind, so try not to let them get into prolonged engagement at all. Any sort of melee, they'll die quite quickly, but yeah, very very fast horse archer. Very sort of typical, but still excellent.
Our aim is true!
However, we then do a massive jump from them up to your Sarmatian nobles. These guys are, I would argue, a very heavy cavalry unit with an armor of 33. But they're still a horse archer unit. So these guys are very heavy horse archer, and they're shock cav as well. They aren't melee cav. They only have a melee defense of 4. That means that they're going to really suffer when it comes to prolonged engagements against enemy cavalry or just enemy anything, really. So I would highly recommend you to try to keep your men away from them, from the enemy, as much as possible. Again though, seeing some female warriors in the mix, which is always fun to see, at least in my opinion it is. I really like that.
Step archers!
And just the unit looks like so amazing. It's really authentic and, dare I say, immersive. And you may or may not know this deep dark secret about my YouTube channel, but I really love immersion. In fact, I can't get enough of it. So to see all of these beautiful uniforms, their armors, even the horses have different armor and colors and whatnot, embroidery and whatever, like, it just, this unit right here is a perfect example of the high quality that the DEI put on the Roxolani now. So that's awesome. I'm very, very grateful for that unit. Excellent unit, and it actually does have some pretty serious armor piercing, but that's because it's a shock cav unit. So, I mean, that's what you get when you use like a lance to charge in. Fire out! Look at this chick right here. She's got a bit of a smaller horse, but she's looking lethal, man. That's a really cool helmet. That must be difficult with your hair, or did she just chop it all off? I don't see any hair on her. Far out. Okay, she's hardcore. Anyway, don't mess with her.
Our aim is true!
And do not mess with the late Sarmatian cataphracts.
Keep those weapons clean, men!
Absolute ballers. Now these guys are the best cataphract unit that you get access to. And these are the contender, which a lot of people are saying is the contender for the best cataphract in the game at this point. They're very lethal looking, although I would argue Media and Parthia have better looking cataphracts, but these bad boys, their stats are just out of this world. A charge bonus of 67 off the just straight up out the gate. A range of 160, which is fantastic for a cataphract unit. Melee attack of 12, defense of 12, armor piercing damage of 13 alongside a weapon damage of 20. Armor of 47 as well. It's just disgusting, their stats. It's kind of scary, really. There's not a lot that they can't do. They will get worn down against range units, but it's going to take quite a while. So if you can pin them down and then hit them with range units, and that's how they'll all die quite quickly. Well, not quite quickly, but the most effectively is... That's the most effective way to kill them. But man, they're really, quite literally, tanks of the ancient world. So these are the bad boys that I would argue are in at least the top 3 contenders for best cataphract in the game. But that needs to be an upcoming video soon, in my opinion. But anyway, that is still a horse archer unit, although, oddly enough, you only get 3 horse archer units. True horse archer units, which some people might think is a little bit weird, but anyway. You do have the 2 skirmisher units, and now we have a large core of actual infantry archers for your faction as well. So you still can do your infantry armies and use archers in that regard. But you don't have, say, the diversity of Parthia, which I would still argue is still the king of horse archers, and really the master class to when it comes to that sort of warfare. Although the Roxolani, man, they're giving Parthia a serious run for their money, man. Whew. Anyway, let's move on to your melee, or at least shock cav units, which is these 4 units here. So immediately, straight off the bat, you have more shock cav than you do just pure horse archers, and even then, one of your horse archers is a shock cav unit, a cataphract of that as well. So you might be getting the theme here, which is cavalry, but it's shock cavalry. They're fantastic on the charge. We have tribal lancers right here, which we talked about briefly before.
Lancers!
Just excellent unit. Very similar looking to that general unit we talked about earlier as well. Just no armor really, only an armor of 4. Very, very fast with a speed of 8 though, so use those bad boys early on. Oh, and they do have 140 men. This is a bit of a new thing that we're seeing in DEI, where there's a few like select units that go up to 140 in terms of cav. This is on ultra graphic settings, FYI, but just wanted to point that out.
We'll kill 'em all!
We then jump up to Sarmatian Lancers. Now these guys only have an attack of 9, which is a bit of a letdown. Only 120 men in them, but they have a good armor of 28. Melee defense of only 6, so again, not a melee cav. These guys are going to be charged into the rear of the enemy, pull them back out as quick as you can. Their armor will let them tolerate enemy skirmisher fire for a little while. But yeah, these guys are really just purely there for the charge. Get them in, get them out. And their high level armor will make them last for the majority of the battle, even if they do take some damage.
Step lancers!
We then have late Sarmatian Lancers. Now these guys have a very long lance. It's actually longer than the Sarmatian Lancers we were just looking at here. But the late version of the Sarmatian Lancer, it's basically just better equipment across the board. So you're going to see slightly better melee attack of 10, armor of 41, which is very, very nice. Quite chunky. Melee defense of 8, so they can survive for a little while in melee combat. But again, they're completely purely shot cavalry, so recharge the enemy, pull them back out, and do it 1,000 times, and you'll obliterate the most toughest of heavy infantry. But they can charge directly into enemy cavalry and come out on top most of the time. Speaking of which, though,
Armored lancers!
we then have Sarmatian Cataphracts. Now look how sick these guys look, man. I'm not sure what you call this type of coloring and whatnot. It looks kind of like bronze style to me. But these guys just look, they look lethal, man. They look very tribal. I'm getting some like very sort of Eurasian sort of influence with them. Especially with like these helmets and whatnot. Solid cataphract unit, but comparing it to the horse archer cataphract unit, it doesn't really compare. I mean it does, but it's just not as good. So if you want sort of best cost effective like super heavy cataphract unit, I would go for your horse archer cataphract. But this unit is still just as, not just as good, but it's still very effective. I mean, excellent stats still. 62 charge bonus is nothing to scoff at. These guys will do serious damage. And because they are your cataphract, they do have armor piercing of 12. Only your cataphract units are the only ones that give you any armor piercing at all, unfortunately. But these guys don't have any ammunition, so no javelins or anything to throw into combat beforehand. Overall, great cataphract unit, but it's not super high tier like your late Sarmatian cataphract unit is, which is just disgusting, really. This unit needs to be stopped. I can't believe how good it is. It's almost too good, really. But anyway, that is the stats of all of your units for the Roxolani roster, the 1.3.2 beta. As you can see, despite it not being massive, it has received massive changes in that you now actually have variety. You can do sword-based armies, you can do spears, you can do archers, you can do shock cavalry, and you can do horse archers. While there is still a few types of units you're missing out, like armor-piercing infantry, for example, you still can make up for that in AOR mercenary units, and you can also change your tactics. For example, use the armor penetration of your cataphracts to go ahead and recharge the enemy heavy infantry. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, let's get to the part 3 section of this video, and we'll talk about the final verdict of the Roxolani. Right, everyone, here we are at the part 3 section of this video. Let's talk about the verdict for the Roxolani. So first off, you have a pretty hard starting position. If you're new to DEI, I can certainly see you having to restart this campaign a few times before you get the hang of it, get the flow of it. Although you do have some reprieves. For example, you have that natural defense of large spacing between all of the settlements in your core province, and invading major powers will have to deal with that, and it will be a problem for them. So you can at least be sort of careless in that regard. And you can use a large amount of territory between your cities as a little bit of a reprieve. So if you do make a mistake and the enemy manages to push into your territory, they still gotta really march quite a way before it becomes a serious threat, and will take a few turns, especially considering things like winter getting in the way. Second point, don't be afraid to migrate, at least a little bit. Now you do have to fight some of the nomadic factions in order to achieve your reforms. However, I would at the very least recommend you move your capital to the Archbosphorus region. That way you can make your capital a bit of a trade hub with trade flowing in and out of it. You don't have to, but it's just my recommendation. Just get your capital to at least be a major city that's the capital of a province. So if need be, take over the province of Sarmatia entirely, and Scythia entirely, and move your capital to the major city in that province. So it's something definitely to consider. You can do a longer migration if you like, but you do need to consider that you have to deal with the reforms that are forcing you to deal with other nomadic factions. Although all you need to do really is face 10 battles against them, and then you can go wherever you like, and doesn't have to be major battles necessarily. Another reason that I do recommend migrating is that because you're a nomadic faction, you actually have a little bit of a hidden feature for these factions, which is your units do not suffer attrition when you lose a settlement. So if you make an army of like full-on cav that are ready to migrate to wherever you like on the map, and you start moving them, but in the meantime your capital gets taken and you have no cities left, it actually doesn't necessarily matter, at least not in single player. Obviously, if you're in a head-to-head campaign, it means you lose the game. But in single player, you can march your nomads wherever you like, and you're not going to take attrition because you don't have supplies coming in from your core province. So that's something that's really nice and something that isn't necessarily highlighted, but it can make a massive difference in your campaign. Especially if you're like me and you like to try and get creative and migrate to different areas to make things very spicy for your campaign. It will be difficult if you do that in an already difficult campaign, but it's something I recommend you at least consider trying. Another point that I mentioned earlier, but I will reiterate, you cannot build a single style of an army and expect to win your entire campaign based off it. This is not Rome. You cannot just build a core of legionaries with a few cavalry auxiliaries and archers or slingers and expect to romper stomp all of the enemy factions. When you're building an army, you need to think about what this army is going to be used for and what factions you're expecting to fight with it, at least in the next 30 or so turns. Beyond that, you can adjust your armies on campaign, recruit mercenaries, AOR units as you take over foreign lands, but when you're creating your army, you really need to consider, okay, is this going to be a field battle army? If so, I can maybe go ahead and do all cav. Or is this going to be an army dedicated to siege warfare, in which case I need a lot of infantry and I need some good archer support as well? Is it going to be a combination of the two? Is it going to be fighting Hellenic factions? Is it going to be fighting nomads? There's so many different little things to consider, but the overall main point of this point I'm making is that you need to consider what this army is for. It's something that seems sort of straightforward and common sense, but it's not necessarily something you might be used to in Total War Rome 2. You might be used to just kind of casually putting together an army and seeing what happens. If you want to have a successful campaign, you really need to think about it in your head before you send out your armies to see what they can do. My next point is, don't be afraid to retreat. It's okay to lose battles, it's okay to lose a little bit of territory, especially when you have so much land to fall back over. But more importantly, it's also completely okay, and if anything, it's actively encouraged that you actually retreat from battles after using all of your ammunition. So if you're doing what I recommended in the early game, which is use horse archer armies, go ahead, use all their ammunition possible, retreat, and then do the same thing again in the next battle. It might take a couple battles, but you can wipe out even the most elite of the heavy infantry factions by doing this tactic. Just ask my man Crassus and see how well he did in that style of warfare against Parthia. It really does work, and it can be very useful, but it's not something that a lot of people are used to doing. So consider it, and really remember that it's okay to retreat. Doesn't mean that you've lost the campaign or that you're a terrible player. You're just trying to use a different strategy to what you otherwise might not be used to using. And then something that's a little bit of a positive to consider before we go to the difficulty rating is that your neighbors aren't really major factions. Yeah, you have the Royal Scythians, which are technically a playable major faction, but they're not major in the grand geopolitical situation. Your main major neighbors that are somewhat close will be the Seleucids, Bactria, not necessarily Archbosphorus, so it's debatable, and Armenia. Parthia can become a major player, but it takes a while for them, so I wouldn't really consider them one early on. But the Seleucids, Bactria, and then Armenia are like sort of your major contenders for the early to mid game once you get out of your nomadic lands. However, there's still a couple provinces away from you, and again, you have such a large amount of territory in your core province. You can sort of guide their armies to go into areas where you want to fight them. You can use the river crossings that are available in your core province as well, so those can be handy if you have infantry-based armies, which you'll need to have to some degree. But unlike, say, the Parthian campaign, where you're surrounded by some very powerful factions and not too many friendly factions as well, being in your position, you're not necessarily under immediate pressure straight out the gate. It's very different to say like a Roman campaign where you're just in war after war after war after war. Take over your core province, and after that you can try to settle into like a little bit of a peaceful mid game where you're only fighting 1 or 2 enemies, depending on your difficulty, of course, that you're playing on. But if you're playing on normal and you get to that mid game, it can be actually relatively peaceful. It's a little bit surprising, but it can be helpful too, because it allows you to focus on that industry economy that we talked about. Anyway, now it's time to come up with a difficulty rating for the Roxolani, and in my opinion, this is hitting us with a solid, delicious 7 out of 10. This is a hard campaign, in my opinion. Although the faction overhauls that have happened for all of the nomads is very helpful to the Roxolani, and it's actually giving you a lot more hope than what you previously had, it's still going to be difficult. It's going to require different lines of thinking compared to typical Rome 2 and especially DEI factions. Even if you play a horse archer based faction like Parthia, as a Roxolani, you still need to take a very different approach to your campaign. So that's a really exciting way to see some more unique immersiveness thrown into the game. Yes, that is a word, we're just making it up now. So anyway, 7 out of 10 for the Roxolani, in my opinion. It's hard, but what do you think of the campaign down below? Do you have any other suggestions? Anything else that you want to throw out there for newcomers to see about the Roxolani to help them have a successful and fun campaign overall? But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I shall see you in the next one.